Have you ever had a sensation down into your arms and into your hands that felt like a burning or tingling sensation, or even maybe possibly just some weakness in grip strength within the hands? Well, it could be that you might be suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome. And so today I want to go ahead and talk about what carpal tunnel syndrome is, as well as some 5 tips that you can actually implement today from home that can help you to alleviate that carpal tunnel syndrome. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, the first question that I want to go ahead and answer is, what is the carpal tunnel? Now, really when it comes down to it, in your wrist, you have small, tiny little bones within the wrist, and they're called carpal bones. Now, they sit on the top of the wrist here, and now underneath the wrist, you actually have this sheath or this ligament that's called the transverse ligament. So if you can think about the carpal bones underneath, and then you have this ligament that goes over like a dome here. Now, inside that carpal tunnel, you actually have some tendons from the forearm muscles, and they go through that carpal tunnel. But you also have what's called the median nerve, which actually provides motor and sensory sensations to the forearm as well as the muscles in the hand. Specifically, you're going to get innervations to the middle finger, the index, and also the thumb. And this is why with carpal tunnel syndrome, oftentimes when that nerve is inflamed or irritated, you will get numbness and tingling or burning sensation into this side of the hand here. Now, the median nerve actually does not start in the wrist. It actually starts in the neck from the roots of C5 to T1, which is basically the mid part of your neck down to the upper part of your back here. Now, this is why as chiropractors, one of the biggest things that we look for is inflammation or irritation to the nerves up in the neck, because if you do suffer from carpal tunnel or numbness and tingling in the arms to the hands, it could be likely that you might be suffering from an issue within the neck here. So we want to make sure that we look at that first. Now, if that's not working, oftentimes we do need to look into other areas, maybe the forearm muscles like the pronator teres muscles, which actually helps to rotate the wrist. But then also we do have to look at the wrist to see if there's any things that we need to do with maybe the movement of the carpal bones, as well as just some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Now, oftentimes people that are in professions that have repetitive use of the wrist and the forearms and the hands, oftentimes we can irritate those bones and also the ligaments and the tendons in there, and they can start to get a little more friction and create more inflammation and irritation, which will bring more swelling. And oftentimes it's the swelling that will create less space within that carpal tunnel, and it'll start to put pressure onto that nerve, and that's where you're going to start to get the numbness and the tingling, the burning sensations, and the aches and the pains with carpal tunnel syndrome. So professions, things like hairstylists, where they're using scissors a lot, things like mechanics. My brother is a diesel mechanic, and man, he's got some huge forearms and some strong hands, but it's because he's doing a lot of repetitive stress trying to undo some of those bolts in the engine. And so things like even chiropractors, massage therapists, physical therapists, we're all using our hands. And so anyone that is using their hands a lot, like typing on a keyboard at an office, so many different types of professions can be vulnerable to this type of issue just because of the excessive use within our hands and our arms here. So I want to go and talk about 5 tips that you can do to help to alleviate the carpal tunnel syndrome and to reduce some of those symptoms or help to just find relief here. So let's go and jump into those and what those are. But before I do, I want to go ahead and just leave a disclaimer that before you do any of this stuff, it is very important that you consult with a doctor or a physician to make sure you get properly diagnosed, and they can give you the best tips that's specifically for you to help to alleviate your carpal tunnel syndrome. So let's go and jump right into it. So tip number 1 is going to be ice. Now, ice is one of the best things that you can do when you have inflammation or irritation to a joint, because ice is a vasoconstrictor, and it actually helps to push out and squeeze out some of the inflammation within the joint here. Now, heat is a vasodilator, so oftentimes heat will bring in more swelling, which is not what we want. And there can be some benefits if that is at that stage of the game, but ice is one of the first things that I recommend. And one of the things that I recommend is getting a ice pack that actually is moldable and shapeable. Now, just note, whenever you're using ice, don't put the ice pack directly onto the skin. We do want to prevent freezer burn. So the best thing is to get a paper towel or a cloth, and you're going to wrap that in the wrap the ice pack in the cloth or the paper towel. So once you get that ready, you're going to go ahead and just wrap that around the wrist. and you want to hold this here for about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and you can do this every hour to every 2 hours depending on the severity of your symptoms. But really, when it comes down to it, I want to go ahead and hold that nice and firm against my wrist, and sometimes I'll even wrap an ace bandage or something that will help to hold this thing nice and snug against the wrist here. Now, as I'm icing this, one of the best things that I like to do is get some movement within the hand. So oftentimes I'll go ahead and extend my wrist and then relax it, and extend the wrist and then relax it. And again, just kind of getting some movement, just because I'm trying to pump out some of that inflammation within the wrist here. The other thing that I recommend too is if you put this ice bottle within the freezer and let it ice up and get frozen, one of the best things that I always recommend is an ice massage. And so if you can just get that ice bottle and you can just do a massage where you just lay this on the table and you're just gonna roll your wrist over that ice bottle, and that's going to help to massage the swelling or the fluid out of that joint, and it's going to help to cool that as well. So again, it's a vasoconstrictor, so it's going to help to reduce some of the inflammation. So it's like an ice massage, and so we're going to talk about massage in just a bit, but this is one of the best things that I recommend. So the first tip is really just icing that joint, trying to get some reduction of the swelling and the inflammation by getting that ice to become a vasoconstrictor, pushing and flushing out some of that inflammation. The second tip is going to be using rubber bands. Now, just like I talked about when you're icing the wrist, just kind of extending your fingers and trying to get some movement in there. The same thing is true as when you're using rubber bands. It's going to help you to do the same type of thing. As you get the rubber bands, you're going to put it around your fingers, and then you're going to do some extension within the fingers and into the wrist here. Now, this does two things here. When you actually use the rubber band, it actually helps to strengthen the extensor muscles of the forearm. Now, this is an antagonistic muscle to the flexion forearm muscles, and so oftentimes when you're contracting the extensor muscles, the flexion muscles will actually relax, and that's exactly what we want, is the relaxation of the forearm muscles. So just doing this a few times throughout the day, there's no hidden number or no secret number or how many times or how often. I honestly just say just do it as often as you can, just because you want to try to pump out some of that inflammation from there. So the second tip here is to use a rubber band, get some movement in there, and try to get some of the swelling to pump out. Tip number 3 is to use a stress ball, or in my case, I found some socks. So you can get a couple of socks, bundle them up into a ball shape, and you can just use this and start to squeeze nice and gently here. Now, the reason why we're doing this is, again, the same thing. We're just trying to contract some of the muscles within the hand and the forearm to try to pump out some of the inflammation here. Now, it's the same thing is true as getting the extension within the fingers. We're going to do the same thing with the fingers contracting here, and it's all trying to pump out some of the inflammation and the swelling within the joint so we can start to free up that nerve and those tendons here. Now, again, I would even put these with the icing, so I would ice for maybe even 10 minutes, do some contracting or extension of the fingers, and then also the contracting and the squeezing of the hand, and then I would ice again for 10 minutes after that. So then that way we can ice, get some of the swelling out of there, do some of the extension, get those forearm muscles working out, but then also squeezing just to pump out some of the inflammation out of that joint. So that can be a very powerful tool when you put them together, but this is something that, again, you can do this every hour to every 2 hours, but the extension of the fingers and the squeezing of the hand, that's something that I would recommend just doing throughout the day as well. Tip number 4 is stretching. Now, like I talked about with the forearm muscles, we oftentimes, as we're repetitively stressing those muscles in those joints, those forearm muscles get really big. Like I talked about, my brother, who is a diesel mechanic, he is actually using those hands quite a bit, so his forearm muscles can get really big and his hands can become very strong. So we want to stretch the fingers and we want to stretch the forearms. And so the way we're going to do this is basically, you're going to go ahead and extend your elbow out, you're going to put your fingers up, and you're going to grab with the other hand and pull the fingers back here. Now, the key to know about stretching, anytime you're stretching, whether it be your neck, your legs, your forearms, you want to hold the stretch for at least 30 seconds. Now, study has shown that if you don't hold for at least 30 seconds, the stretch is pretty much pointless. So you want to make sure that you're holding that for at least 30 seconds to really get as much benefit that you can from the stretch. So you're going to extend that elbow, bring those fingers out, You're going to grab the fingers with the other hand and you're going to pull that back, and you're just going to hold and stretch those forearm muscles. Now, depending on who you are and what profession you have, but sometimes those muscles get really big, so it can be very tight, sometimes very painful. So you want to just go as easy and nice as possible. You're not going to overdo this, but you want to make sure you get a nice deep stretch within the elbow or in the forearms here. Now, extending that elbow as you're stretching and extending that can sometimes deepen that stretch. So if you can, try to do that and try to extend that elbow as much as you can so we can deepen that stretch in the forearms. Now, the other way you're going to do it is actually going upside down. And so you're going to grab those fingers and again, extending that elbow and really deepening that stretch as you're pulling the fingers here. Now, one of the tips that I always like to give when you're stretching is just taking some deep breaths, and on the exhale, you're going to deepen that stretch by really trying to push that. So deep breath through the nose, and then exhale, and really try to deepen that stretch as much as you can here. Again, holding that for 30 seconds. So that's tip number 4 is stretching. Tip number 5 is massage. Now, one of the things that you can do is try to massage some of the fluid and the swelling out of that wrist. And the way that I like to do this is I like to get my hand like this, and I like to use my thumb just grabbing that wrist nice and gently, and you're going to get your thumb and just nicely just massage that wrist going down towards the elbow and towards the heart here. Now, just a rule of thumb that I like to follow is anytime I'm doing some form of massage, I want to go towards that heart just because those veins have valves in it, and you don't want to go against those valves, so you want to kind of go towards that direction that it's pumping towards the heart here. So again, grabbing that wrist, using your thumb, getting some form of Biofreeze, Bengay, just regular lotion or some oil or some ointment. You want to go ahead and just massage that towards the heart and towards the elbow and try to get some of that swelling out of that joint as much as possible. Now, again, there's no magic number to how long or how often you can do this, but if there's any irritation or some pain, you want to make sure you're very sensitive to that. But in terms of the massage, you want to do nice and gentle massage. I would even just give it a rule of thumb. You can do this for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, just trying to get some of that stress out of that joint, get some of that fluid out of that area here, just to get some pressure off of that nerve. And that's it. That's my 5 tips of what you can do from home to try to alleviate carpal tunnel syndrome. I hope that helped you guys. If you like this video, please click that like button. Please leave some feedback below on what you thought about this video, as well as please click that subscribe button to see videos just like this in the future. So thank you again so much for being part of our family here at Ahava Chiropractic. We look forward to seeing you on the next video. God bless. Peace.